Here we go. When Ben walks into science class the next day, 4 or 5 kids are crowded around Mrs. Tibbet's desk. He edges closer to see what they're gaping at. A large glass jar with 3 frogs partially hidden in the mud and the grass at the bottom. "Peepers," he said. "Nuh-uh," Frankie said, grabbing for the jar. "It's frogs. Here, I'll shake 'em up so you can see them better." Ben starts to grab for the jar before the frogs get hurt. And just then, Mrs. Tibbets walks into the room and everybody takes a step back, except for Frankie, who's got the jar in his hands. "Put it down, Frankie," Mrs. Tibbet says calmly. Frankie rolls his eyes and puts the jar back on the desk. "Everybody in your seats," the teacher says. "You'll all have a chance to take a look at our friends here." The students straggle back to their desks, and when the room is quiet, Mrs. Tibbets holds up the jar and turns it around slowly. These little guys are hard to find, but now is a good time to catch them. "You caught them yourself?" Frankie asks. "Of course." "Cool," said Ryan. "Can I see one?" "You can see them from there. I'm not letting them out today." There are pleads and groans, but Mrs. Tibbets ignores them. "Has anyone ever seen one outside?" Several kids shake their heads. "You may not have seen them, but I'll bet some of you have heard them," says Mrs. Tibbets. She looks at Ben. "How about you, Ben?" "Yeah," he says, not looking her in the eye. "They're spring peepers. I've heard them behind my house." "Can you make their sound for us?" Mrs. Tibbets asks. Ben hesitates. "Come on, Ben," Ryan says. And Ben can feel everyone looking at him. He shrugs. "I don't know. It's sort of a high peeping sound." He tries to imitate a peeper. "Eep, eep, eep." A couple of the kids laugh, but Jenny says, "Oh, I've heard that noise. I heard it every night last week." "Me too," someone else chimes in. "Let's try it," says Mrs. Tibbets. "Let's make a peeper chorus." And all the kids start making peeper noises. They're having a great time. Making noise in class is something no one ever lets them do. Mrs. Tibbets gives them about 30 seconds and then signals for them to be quiet. "Those little frogs make that big a noise?" Frankie says. "They sure do," Mrs. Tibbets says, almost laughing. "Other amphibians make even louder noises. You can hear a bunch of Spadefoots from a long, long way away when they're singing." "What are Spadefoots?" Ryan asks. "I'm talking about Spadefoot toads," Mrs. Tibbet explains. "Their name comes from the rough, shovel-like growths on their back feet. They use them like little spades to burrow into ground." "Well, what do they sound like?" Jenny asks. "Like a big flock of crows cawing," the teacher said. "Or some say that they sound like hundreds of balloons being rubbed together." "I haven't heard a noise like that," Jenny says. "Well, Spadefoot toads are very rare around here. In fact, they're listed as a threatened species in our state, and they only come out 1 or 2 nights a year, usually after a rain spell in April." Mrs. Tibbet smiles. "If we get a good rain next week, there's a good chance they'll be out." "Why only 1 night?" Ryan blurts out. "Well, they don't have much time," the teacher says, "because they only lay their eggs in pools that dry up." "Vernal pools," says Ben. Mrs. Tibbets gives him a nod. "Right, Ben. They choose temporary pools because their eggs will be safer there." There are no fish to gobble them up, but since these pools don't last that long, they all have to work fast together. The male comes out and sings, and then the female comes out and lays their eggs. The male fertilizes the eggs, and in 2 days the tadpoles hatch, and within a month they hop away as toadlets. So it's all over very quickly, and most people don't even know they're there. Well, what happens to them then? Asked Jenny. They dig deep holes in the ground with their back feet and bury themselves in the wet earth, up to 8 feet deep, and they stay there most of the time. That's why you can't find them during the rest of the year. It would be cool to see them, Ryan says. Well, I was thinking. Mrs. Tibbets lowers her voice almost to a whisper, like she's telling a ghost story, and a sly smile spreads across her face. Everyone leans a little closer. If some of you are interested, we might have a little field trip one night next week. It just so happens that I have a pool on my land where the Spadefoots come to breed. Would you like that? The kids all yell their approval. How many of you think you might come? Half of the classes raise their hand. Ben feels empty inside, like something that belonged to him is now being given away to others that don't really care about it as much as he does. He's dying to go, but he doesn't raise his hand. I've made some permission slips, and people who are interested need to take one and bring it back signed. Your parents will bring you over to my house and then pick you up afterwards. I'll have to let you know at the last minute what day it'll be, though. We'll just have to watch the weather. Well, what day do you think it will be? Ryan asks. Well, they're forecasting rain for Wednesday or Thursday, so let's hope they're right. I don't think your parents will want you going on a field trip on the weekend. When Mrs. Tibbets hands out the permission slips, Ben takes one and stuffs it into his backpack. And on the way to Mrs. Kircher's class, Frankie sneers, "Who wants to go into the woods with the frog lady?" "Rip, not me." I do, Ben thinks. But I can't. Wait, Frankie yells. Her name isn't Miss Tibbets. It's Miss Ribbit. Ribbit, Ribbit. He quaffs. He's beside himself at how funny he is. Ben just glares at him. The next Monday, half of the class bring in their permission slips. The other half can't go or just doesn't want to. Ben's permission slip is still in his backpack, unsigned. There's no rain that day or the next day. It's like Massachusetts has just changed almost overnight from being a cold, dark, rainy, muddy place into a sunny world full of life. The skies are blue every day and the temperature rises into the 60s. And on Wednesday, a few kids wear shorts to school. Is it going to be tonight? Ryan asked Mrs. Tibbets. He's asked the same question at least 24 times over the past 2 days. It doesn't look like it, the teacher says. It's got to be raining really hard. Ben watches, feeling farther and farther away from everything and everybody. But what happens if it doesn't rain enough? Janice asks. Well, then the they'll just wait until next year, Mrs. Tibbets says. They can wait 3 or 4 years before they lay eggs. 4 years? We'll never see them, Ryan wails. Nature takes its time, Mrs. Tibbets said. Unlike most people, nature is very patient. Thursday starts out sunny, and by 9 o'clock in the morning, in the middle of reading, The skies begin to darken, and by the time Ben gets to Mrs. Tibbet's class, it looks like it could start raining any second. Tonight? Ryan asks. Is it tonight? I don't think so, Mrs. Tibbet said. Most scientists think that the Spadefoots get their message from the rain seeping into the soil so the ground won't be soaked enough tonight. But what happens if it happens over the weekend? Someone asks. We'll miss it. Well, let's just wait and see what happens, Mrs. Tibbet says. The skies stay gray. The clouds thicken, and the air feels damp and heavy. But the rain doesn't come. At home that night, Ben spreads out everything he has so far for his geography report. He's downloaded information off the internet and made notes on some index cards, but he can't seem to get interested. It all seems dry and boring, and he's staring at the wall above his desk when he hears the phone ring. Ben, his mother calls. It's Toby. Finally, Ben thinks. He's been sending his friend emails for days and hasn't heard back. He even called a couple of times and left messages. Lizard Man, he says as he picks up the phone. Hi, Toby answers. His voice sounds uneasy. How's Arizona? Okay. How's Massachusetts? It stinks, as usual, Ben says. Too bad, says Toby. Ben waits for Toby to say more, but he doesn't. And he wonders why Toby called if he doesn't want to talk. Toby's always easy to talk to. The silence at the other end of the line feels strange. How's Lenny? Ben asks. Well, that's why I'm calling. Toby's voice is tight and thin. My mom said that I should. Ben grips the receiver to his ear. Something happened. Toby finally goes on. He got sick or something, and I found him in the terrarium. Wait, Ben says. You mean he died? He's dead? Yeah, I don't know. I didn't mean to. They're both silent for a moment. I'm really sorry, Ben. Didn't you feed him right? Ben feels tears welling up in his eyes. What were you feeding him? No, I did. I mean, Dad said maybe he was old, or maybe he didn't like the change when he came to my house, but you were supposed to take care of him. I know. It wasn't my fault. I didn't. Ben can tell that Toby is close to tears too, and he doesn't know what to say. And he's afraid he's going to get so mad that he'll say something really stupid. Okay, Ben mutters. I'll talk to you later. I'm sorry. Ben hangs up first. He puts his jacket on and he goes outside where no one can see or hear him. This is stupid, he tells himself. The dumb lizard was 2,000 miles away. You probably never would have seen him again anyway. But Ben feels like he's lost more than a pet. He sits down on the back steps and stares out into the woods behind his house. The spring peepers are calling, and so are the American toads. He looks up. He can't see any stars. He wonders when the rain will start. And that makes him think of the Spadefoots. He'd love to see them, but that would mean he would have to talk to Mrs. Tibbets, and thinking about Mrs. Tibbets makes him think about the snakes and his dead lizard, and it just goes around and around in circles until his stomach tightens up again. Ben, are you out there? His father calls out the back door. The light comes on. Yeah, Ben answers. What are you doing? Listening, he says. Well, it's time to come in, unless you're planning on spending the night out there. That sounds like a good idea to Ben. At least out here, he wouldn't have to deal with people. But he gets up and trudges out onto the back porch. You okay? His father asks. Ben nods. Yeah, just wondering if it's going to rain. Feels like it to me. Ben tries to slip by his father, but his father grabs his shoulder and looks at him. You sure you're okay? My lizard died, Ben says, and he knows it's more than that. But it's the simplest thing to say. His father wraps his arms around Ben and just holds him there for a while. Ben buries his face into his father's sweater. It smells like his dad. Things will look better in the morning, his dad says. Why don't you just give it up and go to bed? Ben nods. He goes back into his room and he puts on his pajamas. He doesn't really care about his homework. He doesn't really care about much of anything. Ben wakes up in the middle of the night. Sheets of rain are lashing against the windows of his room. He burrows down in the blankets. He's like a Spadefoot deep down in the earth. He falls half asleep, listening to the sounds of the rainstorm. It's still raining when Ben gets up, and at breakfast he goes through his backpack and he finds the permission slip from Mrs. Tibbetts and asks his mom to sign it. She reads it over and frowns. Ben, it says here that this is for a weeknight. But it didn't happen yet, and it might happen tonight because it's raining now. But I can't imagine that she'll have kids come over to her house on a Friday night. But what if she does? Just sign it, please. Ben pleads. His mother signs the paper and hands it back to him. You're lucky to have a teacher who will spend time with you outside of school, she says. Yeah, says Ben. I know. Ben doesn't have science on Fridays, but after lunch, he goes to Mrs. Tibbetts' room. She's sitting at her desk, peeling an orange. Hi, Mrs. Tibbetts, he says. Hello, Ben. He walks over and hands her the permission slip. This is a little late, she says. I thought there was some reason that you didn't want to come. I know. Ben takes a deep breath and clears his throat. But I was thinking, if you're going to look for the Spadefoots, I'd like to come. Mrs. Tibbetts puts down her orange and peers at Ben. There's no field trip now, she says. I said I'd only do it on a weeknight. It's Friday. I know, but Ben can feel the secret inside of him trying to work its way out. But he can't tell her what happened. He just can't. He swallows. But I still want to come with you to look for the Spadefoots. Have your parents call me, Mrs. Tibbetts says. And if it's okay with them, then I'd love to have you. Okay, says Ben. Do you think tonight's the night? It seems like it to me. It's now or never. Okay, says Ben. I'll bring my new boots. New boots, huh? Says Mrs. Tibbetts with a smile. Okay, I'll be waiting to hear from your parents. Are you almost ready? Ben calls out. Mrs. Tibbetts says she'll be by for you in 10 minutes. I'm ready, Ben says, hurrying into the living room. I want to go too, whines Agatha. You don't even like frogs. Ben wonders if there's actually a chance his parents would let her go. He hopes not. I told you no, Aggie, Mrs. Maroney says. You'll have a gymnastics meet tomorrow, and you need to be in bed early. I still want to go, Agatha says. You still can't. Agatha says, She spins on her heels and heads off to her room. Ben parks himself on the arm of the sofa where he can see down the street, and it seems like he's waiting forever. But finally, Mrs. Tibbet's old station wagon pulls up his driveway. "Are you sure you want to go out tonight?" his mom asks. "It's really pouring." Ben rolls his eyes. "It has to be raining, Mom. That's when they show up." "You're going to get soaked," his mother says, smiling. He can tell that she's happy that he's going. "I've got a raincoat," Ben says, "and these." He holds up his new boots. His mother shakes her head. "Well, you wouldn't catch me wading around in all that muck." She reaches up to zip up his coat. She can't help herself. "Mom, I can do it," he says. He pulls his hood over his head and dashes out the door. "You ready?" Mrs. Tibbets asks once he hops in the car. Ben nods. "Good. You can put the waders on when we get to the house. You're going to need them." They drive through the night with the rain pattering on the car roof and the tires hissing over the wet roads. Mrs. Tibbets keeps on a one-way conversation going the whole time. He hasn't seen anyone this excited since they took his sister Agatha to ride horses on her 7th birthday. "I've never seen a more perfect night. I just can't wait. I'm wondering how many there'll be this year. The last time I was out on the right night, there must have been a dozen pairs. We'll just have to see." "A dozen pairs? That's all?" Ben asks. That doesn't seem like very many to him. "That's all. Of course, when my husband and I first started counting them, there were lots more. As far as I know, no one else has ever spotted any Spadefoots in the area. We found a few other vernal pools, but no Spadefoots. Ours is the only place." Mrs. Tibbets cuts her sentence short, and Ben looks over at her. "Well, there must be some other ones around somewhere," he says. "I don't know. There aren't many left." The state now lists them as threatened, on the verge of being endangered. "You mean endangered like almost extinct? Like the golden toads down in Costa Rica?" "Right. There are still plenty of eastern spadefoots in other states, but their numbers have really dwindled in Massachusetts." "Why?" "Well, it's the farthest north that they live. There are fewer and fewer places for them to call home. Too many people, too many trees coming down, and houses going up, habitat loss." She flips on her turn signal and slows down. "But let's not talk about that. Tonight, our mission is to see how they're doing." Mrs. Tibbets leans over her steering wheel and peers through the windshield. She slows even more until they're barely moving. "What are you doing?" "Looking for toads." "Or salamanders. This is the place where they hop over the road to get to the pool. I found a couple of squish toads every year." "Look, there's something moving right there." Mrs. Tibbet steps on the brake and they lurch to a stop right in the middle of the road. She's crazy, Ben thinks. But then he sees a small form in the beam of the headlights. "Go look, Ben. See what it is." Ben looks both ways for cars, but the road is quiet and dark in either direction, and then he opens his door. "Be careful," Mrs. Tibbets warns. He trots out in front of the station wagon into the path of the headlights, and there, 15 feet from the car, is a small huddled form of a toad. And when Ben picks it up, it moves its hind legs freely, as if it's trying to get away, and then hunches down in its hands. Ben runs back to Mrs. Tibbet's side of the car, where she's rolled down the window. He holds out the toad, and Mrs. Tibbet shines the flashlight on it. "Ah," she mutters, "it's just a regular old American toad. Dime a dozen." It's still cute, though. She strokes its head. Ben remembers how she kissed the frog in class. All right, she tells Ben, take this little girl and put her on the other side of the road so she doesn't have to hop across. She's so cold, she's not moving very fast. Ben carefully puts the toad in the wet grass on the side of the road and climbs back in the car. When Mrs. Tibbets pulls into her driveway and shuts off the engine, the rain sounds even louder on the roof of her car. You know, Ben, we make a pretty good pair, you and me. Out hunting toads. She pockets her keys and opens the car door. Everyone looking for a home. Ben isn't really sure what she means by that last remark, but she's out of the car before he can say anything. Put the boots on, she calls him. Let's go into the backyard. Ben pulls off his sneakers and opens the door so he can put on the big boots. And as soon as he climbs out of the car, Mrs. Tibbets is already scurrying around the side of the house like a kid hurrying to see what's under the Christmas tree. He follows, the rain pattering on the hood of his jacket. He pulls it up off his head, and he feels the cool wetness on his forehead and neck. As he comes around to the side of the garage, he's nearly blinded by a bright light. Oh, sorry, says Mrs. Tibbets. The beam switches off, and he can see that she's strapped a light to her forehead so it moves whenever she turns her head. Come on! She motions for him to follow and walks across the grass. And when she reaches the edge of the woods, she stops so quickly that Ben bumps into her. She holds her hand. Shh, she says. Just listen. Ben doesn't hear anything at first. At least not anything he hasn't heard already. The rain, the thunder, off in the distance, the wind in the trees, the peepers calling, the toads trilling. What? He asks. Listen. There they are. Ben listens hard, and then he hears a layer of noise in the lower register. Hoo, hoo, hoo. Like a tree full of crows cawing or a bunch of people snorting. Is that the Spadefoots? He asks. Like that honking sound? That's them. They stand there a little while longer, just listening. And finally, without a word, Mrs. Tibbets gestures him over toward the woods. Flashlights still off, they walk across the yard and across the field. The thunder crashes closer now, and a torrent of rain sweeps past them, gusts of wind blowing the spidery branches of the trees back and forth. Ben shivers. He hustles to stay close behind Mrs. Tibbets. This time, she doesn't stop to look at the tree or at the wildflowers. She doesn't even look back to make sure he's still there. And they make their way through the woods. The calls get louder. Spadefoot toad voices calling out one after another, grunting for all their worth. Ben can't help but feel like he's in a fairy tale, following into a weird old magical woman deeper into the forests. He can't believe it's real. Mrs. Tibbet stops at the edge of the pool. Dripping tree branches droop over the water. The pond looks bigger than it did the other day. Mrs. Tibbets puts a finger to her lips, and they stand and listen. A riot of sound rises and falls all around them. They're surrounded by a crazy orchestra. The wind in the trees, the thunder in the sky, the rain pattering on the pool in their jackets, the spring peepers chirping in the distance, and the little Spadefoot toads right before them leading the symphony. Mrs. Tibbet steps into the pool and motions for Ben to follow. The moment she wades in, the Spadefoot calls stop. It's all right, Mrs. Tibbet whispers. They'll start again. And even in wading boots, Ben can feel the cold water around his feet and his ankles and his legs. He shivers. Again, he's not sure if it's from the cold or the excitement. And they stand still, silently waiting. Another starts, and then several more. Hoo, 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 hoo. After a minute has passed, Ben figures that there must be at least a dozen calling from different parts of the pool. There's a lot, Mrs. Tibbet says, and even in the dark, Ben can see that she's smiling, and he smiles back. And then she laughs out loud, a high-pitched giggle like a little girl. Why are you laughing? Oh, it's so silly, she says. What? My husband Thomas, he used to tell a story that he made up when he was little. And he said if you listen really carefully when the toads are out, you can hear the overtoad. The overtoad? Right. It's something that he made up, like the king of all the toads, or the spirit toad that watches over all the toads and the places they live. And when they're all calling out, the overtoad joins in. We used to laugh about it. Watch out, he'd say. It's a night for the overtoad. Mrs. Tibbets makes a croaking sound. Can you hear it, Ben? I think tonight is the night for the overtoad. Ben loves the idea of an overtoad. He almost expects to see it rise up over the pool 25 feet tall, protecting all the little toads. And he can't explain why, but he feels a chuckle welling up inside of him. And the laughter bubbles out of his throat, and it sets Miss Tibbets to laughing again. And Ben tries to stifle his giggles, but the more she laughs, then the more he does. This time, the noise doesn't seem to bother the toads, and they just keep on calling out. Ben catches his breath, and he tries to imitate the Spadefoot toad sound. Pretty close. Mrs. Tibbets makes a higher pitched cawing sound, and both of them stand in the pool in the rain, adding their voices to the Spadefoot toad chorus, calling out to the overtoad. It's crazy and silly and amazing. They're all saying, "We're here! We're here! We're alive!" Mrs. Tibbets motions for Ben to come closer to her, and she switches on a light strapped around her head. They shine it around the pool, turning this way and that, and then stops the beam on a branch sticking up out of the pool. She leans over so Ben can hear above all the noise. Look. There. Ben sees the little Spadefoot in the spotlight, resting on a branch floating on the surface of the water. Mrs. Tibbets wades over to it and Ben follows. She picks up the toad carefully and directs the light back to the branch. And just below it, there's another toad swimming through the water. And she scoops that one up too. So she has one in each hand. This is the male, the one that was calling, and here's the female. She turns it over. You see how fat it is? It has a bunch of eggs to lay. Here, take a toad. The male Spadefoot crouches low in Ben's hand. It's smooth, not like the other toads that he's held, and he can clearly see the 2 yellow stripes on its back. The eyes are shiny metallic gold. Mrs. Tibbet strokes her toad's head. Just think, she says, they come here every spring. This little pool has been the home for ancestors of these toads for hundreds, maybe even thousands of years. And they were probably here before people ever lived in our area. Wow, says Ben. Cute little guy. Yeah, Ben can feel the toad's smooth belly on his palm. Imagine a family living in a place for thousands of years. They let the toad slip back into the water and watch them swim to the branch. Let's count the couples, Mrs. Tibbet suggests, and trying as best they can counting any toad twice. They wade in the pool, looking and listening for the Spadefoots. And working in the rain for half an hour, they come up to 16 pairs and 6 individuals. That's several more than last year, Mrs. Tibbet says. Great! It is great. It's wonderful. I think we're all done. They wade out of the pool and stand on the edge, very close to one another. It's still noisy with the rain and the wind and the thunder and the toads and the frogs, but Ben feels quiet inside. And suddenly, he knows it's time. Mrs. Tibbetts? Yes, Ben? I let your snakes go. She turns her head. She's got her headlamp on, and the bright light hurts his eyes. He can barely make out the details of her mouth and eyes and nose. She's looking right at him. He holds his breath, wondering what she'll say. Oh, she says. Ben shuts his eyes to keep the light out. It was an accident. I didn't mean to. I was just curious, but I shouldn't have messed with the cage, and I'm really sorry. I'm sorry if they got out and died. I didn't mean for it to happen. She doesn't speak, and then he feels her hand on his shoulder. It's all right, Ben. I'm sorry too. But thank you for telling me. The relief is tremendous. He doesn't know why, but he begins to cry. Great sobs come up from deep inside of him, catching him totally off guard. Mrs. Tibbet switches off her headlamp and puts her arm around him, and they just stand there awkwardly by the side of the pool. The rain splats against their raincoat, and Ben's body heaves up and down as if he just can't make it stop. I'm sorry. Ben takes a deep breath and just lets the sobs subside. I'm sorry, he repeats over and over. I'm sorry. Of course you are, his teacher says, over the sound of the rain. Anyway, it doesn't really matter about the snakes now. She pauses and then says, maybe they'll find a home somewhere else. Wiping his face, Ben looks up at her, and at first he thinks it's the rain, but then he sees that there are tears on her cheeks too. Why are you crying? Oh, I'm sorry too. For me? Yes, for you. And for all of this. She sweeps her arm in a semicircle, gesturing around at her. What do you mean? Nothing, she says. No, really. What are you sorry about? She shakes her head again. Does it have anything to do with your sister-in-law and what she said the other day? She doesn't answer. What's happening? Is it something with your home? In a way. Why? How? It's very complicated, Ben. Tell me. Please, Ben says. He really wants to know. And for a moment, for just a second, he doesn't see Mrs. Tibbet as a teacher. It's like he's looking at her through a magical pair of binoculars that show who someone really is, and not how they fit in his own little model of the world. Mrs. Tibbet sniffs and laughs again, wiping the rain and the tears from her cheeks with the back of her hand. Well, fair is fair. You told me your secret, and I'll tell you mine. But let's do it inside over something warm. I love these toads, but I am certainly not one of them. She turns away from the pool and heads down the trail toward the house. The whole way back, Ben listens to the toads calling out, "We're here. We're alive. We're here."